In this jungle guide, we're going to have a look at how the meta has developed since the mid-season patch of 12.10 and discuss how you must jungle in order to succeed and thrive in the new reality. Otherwise known as a durability patch, everyone is essentially more tanky, thus reducing the impact of your damage. Don't forget I'm uploading coachings on the live patch, obviously fresh on my Patreon, as well as coaching signups being there as well. Don't forget my Zyra GG Volleyball guide will give you everything you need to know about the bear, and a Warwick one coming very soon, so keep your eyes out on the app. And obviously if you enjoy this, like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. But just to give you a little bit of an overview, obviously with things being more tanky, you're going to see some clips now from some of my own personal testings as well as some other high elo games. What you're essentially seeing is fights that normally would be over are being drawn out. Champions who can have second rotation of spells in those fights are succeeding better than those who don't. Because everyone got more HP and of course resistance per level, those champions who do percentage HP are thriving as well. It also means the more level leads you have, the more inherent resistances you get now, and thus for those enemies who are behind and not itemizing correctly, they're gonna have a difficult time killing you where they would have in the past year. This means that junglers' reactive path in getting to those fights can really turn the tides of a game because people aren't gonna die before you get there now. It also means that having the right items to deal with the enemy comp and of course amplify the strengths of your champion really is coming forth in a strong way, and obviously that also means your team fighting needs to be pristine. Using good spacing, using a multiple rotation of spells, ability haste is definitely strong. All of these things are impactful, and obviously being able to survive the burst from well-designed champions, 200-year design champions, that is absolutely beautiful. And just like the meta-analysis gameplay I did at the start of the year, I will basically be applying this to every single jungle class, so no matter what jungler you play, this should all be relevant to you. It's more about the core principles and fundamentals you need to be mindful of as a jungler as we enter the new meta. And we're going to talk about all the other things that are coming forward in this meta, and you can get a really good example of what you need to be thinking about. Now obviously in the first case here, we have Diana doing a full sequence starting red, we have Lillia starting leashless and doing a blue down. This is interesting because junglers, if you can have a faster clear in whatever way, if you do a 5 camp faster than the enemy 5 camp, if you can do a 5 camp way before they do a 6 camp, if you can do a 3 camp and get on the map before they can finish their full clear, all of this will allow you to dominate games by gaining a tempo advantage. Because even though farming is still very important and you do need to be able to weave that in with your ganking, it is really imperative that you get on the map, you get into lanes, you spend time holding and pushing waves because that's where your experience leads will come from. That being said, it really is important that you are able to sequence or cut your sequences short to make the right plays to destroy the enemy jungler and prevent them from getting going. That is rule number 1. And as you're seeing with Diana here, we do our full clear way before the Lillia does, obviously because she was leashless, and we look for that bottom lane gank. Here we are pathing in the same direction. We don't know exactly where she's going to be. She could have soloed Raptors. As soon as you see those Kruggy stuff bouncing around, you know where she is. You can use the aggressive positioning of your bottom lane. And what you're going to watch unfold is basically in this challenger game, a long early fight. This would not have happened in the last patch. Players are being way more aggressive with these things because they can survive more. And that's also not necessarily always a good thing. You should be punished for bad positioning, but I don't think it's necessarily going to win people games. If you make an over-aggressive play, you're still going to be chunked. There's still going to be implications for you having to go back to base perhaps. And of course, most of the time you will die if you put yourself in a bad situation. Now, as you'll notice, the pathing meta in terms of how we focus on clearing and where we go after we die and where we go after the first rotation, that hasn't changed. But the fact that enemy laners and teams will rotate to these long skirmishes knowing they can impact them will make the game a lot more fiesta. And that's really what I've noticed. A lot of the games I'm looking at have a very high kill count. This isn't always because the fights are good, it's because they can actually rotate and impact them and get more kills as a team. So don't AFK farm and think, you know they're fighting, nothing can happen. If the enemy jungler, the enemy mid, the enemy laners rotate to that, actually end up winning those fights, now you're gonna have a harder time dealing with them because again, they're getting more HP per level, more resistances per level, and you're gonna feel that when you don't have the right itemization because you're behind in gold. Obviously, scaling champions will have a break-even point and you will be able to catch up, and that's a whole different discussion, but of course we need to think about these things. So what Lillia can do now is use the outside and roll, take that outside crab, and then sequence all the way down again. Because she'll be ahead of the Diana just in terms of being on the map, and Diana's going to do the same damn thing. You can actually buy yourself a little bit of time and cut out an edge camp. In this case, because we're sequencing down, we can skip the Krugs, obviously they're not fully up yet because of our slower clear, and go ahead and gank that lane first. However, you have to pay attention to macro spells, and they seemingly have a Shen. It also means Diana can rotate, she will ding level 6, the Lillia will not, and again a nice long drawn out fight with a numbers advantage, and champions that thrive in those longer fights with multiple spell usages, once more they win. However, Lilia's team will claw back the gold lead Let me just show you the gold graph up until a certain point cut off so you don't get the ending spoiled for you, but you can see they do close it up. How should Diana play with the lead in this meta, and how should Lillia play with the deficit in this meta? We get to answer both those questions in this video. Now, the cost of Shen doing his ninja business on the bottom lane is Gwen gets free real estate on those top plates. Now, Diana doesn't have her Krugs respawning just yet. Obviously, her red is up. She can think deeply about perhaps, doing the Krugs and sequencing down if they were available, but I love the concept here of ignoring those Krugs and just going red down to kind of make sure you're staying active in lanes and keeping that lead snowballing, keep feeding the win condition. And of course, in this case, that's ourselves plus the Yasuo because we need to combo. However, she decides to actively do the Krugs and then use the pressure to go to the top lane before the Gwen resets because she's sitting on a decent amount of gold, so we do have an item spike. So you can think about the way I said those things, but at the same time, reading the information on the map by pressing tab, clicking, using your F keys, this is imperative in the meta because if you do have that itemization spike, a mythic to a ruby crystal plus, an amp tome, what is she gonna do to you even with the buff stats? Nothing. However, because we didn't really think deeply about the fact that the Lillia would be doing outside and rule, taking the outside crab, sequencing down, and still being in the area in that top quadrant, she rotates. Yone uses the prio he has on his brother to also rotate, and even though she won't be exactly bursted out as she was in the past, as you can see, she still dies. So the lesson here is reactive pathing to get to fights is very, very huge. You must use it. The other thing is also make sure you're tracking enemy junglers and respecting if they're in the area. Because long fights will require a lot of mana and a lot of cooldowns, you're going to be lower on resources after a skirmish than you would have been in previous patches, and especially those who've been playing only in the last couple of years. And I feel like that's quite an important point. The resource management and usage rate on these longer fights to get through and kill somebody will cost you at the end of the longer fights when other people rotate. Be mindful of these things. However, obviously a lot of us are limit testing and figuring out, how can we still one-shot people? How much damage do we need to kill people and certain champions? All of us are relearning how much we can tank and how much we can dish out every single game we play. So in terms of that aspect, you will have to learn your champion, almost relearn it essentially, and apply it to the current game state that you're playing in. I cannot help you there. That's on you to actually go ahead and practice and get some experience. What hasn't changed though is obviously that Herald is really, really important, especially for coming back and especially for snowballing leads. So it's unfortunate we lost that. But of course we have the lead. So you're seeing the Diana basically go from Raptors into the mid lane to push that, and now using that advantage and the lead that they still have, that she still has, to get into the Lillia's jungle. We know that they scale. We know that the Gwen, Lillia, and Yone are going to be very, very difficult to deal with later on. And so when you have the lead like Diana and you have a bit of a setback, obviously you will, make sure you don't, go to the Raptors and sequence down your blue side into the bottom lane. That's too conservative. You need to keep pushing the limits of your lead so that you can have those stat advantages over the enemy. And now, of course, we're low, we need to base, our bottom lane needs to base, there's nothing to do, so we can go ahead and do our blue side quadrant, sync up with our bot lane. That means we're doing our blue side, waiting for our bot lane to get back into lane, and we can spend that time instead of sitting still and playing thumb wars with ourselves, we can go ahead and take some camps and farm. Very important concept there to keep your CSPM up. At the same time, Lillia is probably going to look to sequence up and use a Herald for the Gwen to really elevate the game state and take that split pushing to the next level. But as we know, Gwen's kinda OP and has everything she needs to thrive in this meta, so who knows. Now you might want to ignore the dragon here, but a mountain dragon and doing nothing, I kind of rather just do the mountain dragon, get those extra tanky stats, which is huge when you have a lead, and then we can move and go into the enemy jungle, look to dive between the towers, take that out of bottom lane tower, all those good things while the Lillia actually does use a Herald top lane and push 2 towers. So basically the fact that we're dying here, not getting that dragon plus a few towers ourselves, plus all the camps, plus maybe pushing some plates mid lane, that is definitely a concern of mine. So make sure you are still doing that in this meta, yeah? Don't ignore that crucial dragon if there's nothing else to be done. Don't ignore the fact that if they're top side, we need to make sure we're making good plays on the bottom side, not throwing away that positioning by dying. So where does this lead in terms of the meta? What is new about this? Well, let's have a look. Bambi is obviously taking our top side and our red buff, and obviously we went to base involuntarily. So we're going to leave the base, take our blue side, make sure we get that dragon, and now the good old fashioned, well, we have no outer turrets on the side lanes, let's look to do something in the mid lane. And herein is a really great example of how long and how intense a fight can be if you play it properly. You need to go in and out when your survivability is questioned. If you have a long range spell and use everything, keep your distance until they're up again. Cooldowns now for second rotational spells are really, really crucial. As you all know, I play a lot of Zyra in all positions, and essentially the biggest thing is I like to play Electrocute Burst Assassin Zyra, and that has really gone down a cliff. I have to definitely use that and have a lot more plant focus, which means Leandries is obviously very good always, but now the plants are really doing extra work in these longer fights. And just like that, Diana's team using good in and out gameplay, using the fact that they have a Lulu, thank goodness, and out-sustaining the enemy team in this particular fight. I think I would have preferred maybe securing that mid lane tower if possible, but Diana goes to push the bottom wave tower, Lillia is able to capitalize and kill their bot lane. And as you can see, that's not new. Bot lanes are still bot lanes, and bad junglers are still bad junglers complaining about bot lanes. It's a circle of life. Oh, what's that? You want another example of the high damage assassin meta with brainless plays just killing people by accident because you just decided to yeet in and actually not being able to do that anymore? Well, look at this. Because Diana's bot lane had a mishap in the mid lane and the enemy team is now gonna get that second herald, of course they got the first one as well, she decides, hey, you know, I can just go in with Yasuo and auto-win games without thinking. Yeah, look at that. It's not the case anymore. Also have to look at the atomization. We've got a Riftmaker Gwen, so that's going to be really tough to deal with. You've got a Giant's Belt Lillia. You do have a lot of built-in sustain from the Yone's atomization, and of course the glorified beautiful cow. And in conclusion, you can't milk those. Whereas in the previous meta, I'm not necessarily saying they would have 100% killed them, but they were more likely to have done that, which means even if it's a 2v4, they just blow up 2 people and now they can blow up the rest of the team. Because you cannot do that now, these tenuous, stupid, and irresponsible engages are being punished by teams who are playing together. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very important. However, enemies who are split pushing and disrespecting the cadence of the map in terms of macro and side lanes and minion waves, you know, typical solo queue things, even in a challenger game like this, make sure you do use your lead that you still have for now and go ahead and collapse and obliterate them. Your team will rotate, hopefully, and you can do your business. If they don't, you might have to be a bit more cautious, just don't die and blame them. But as you can see, Diana's team has one last shot at actually closing this game out. But what you can see here is while they can kind of really push and try and take that tier 2, while they're really trying to actually push the map and get into their base, it takes a lot longer to kill people, which means the enemy team who have died will respawn and get there sooner because of course you're on their side of the map, and then of course you're low on resources. It's a whole circle of life. So it's better in this situation to not overcommit. Yes, you have a lot of insane survivability, the Lulu does help, but of course now the enemy team are killing you, you don't get to reset and you lose that advantage you just gained. So what is a good recipe for success when you think about the atomization and how we need to play this phase? Well, if people are good at doing percentage max HP and maybe not having a lot of armor and magic shred, then resistances plus shields can be really, really useful. So I think Gargoyle Stoneplate is something that junglers and especially tank junglers, you do need to think about it just a little bit. But obviously when you're struggling in these long team fights and there's a Lillia and of course there's a Gwen, you kind of don't want to be caught 5v5ing the whole time, specifically as they're now scaling. You've thrown a few times, so try and make a numbers advantage. If you can get a good old-fashioned engage and clean them up, do so. You can use your extended numbers advantage if you kill 2 5v3 and do the Baron, push into the inhibitors, all that good stuff, but as you can see, it's kind of difficult to kill certain targets in this meta, and thus the enemy team can rotate and win the fight. Gwen is a champion, Lily is a champion, and it's too late for you to do anything about it. Teamfighting meta requires tankier people, good ADCs, exquisite positioning, great peel, great engage. This meta is a very skillful one because if you do it correctly, you will be absolutely fine. If you're a donkey looking for Shrek and you just love to go in because you can kill people with your damage, that's no longer the reality. You need to have a very measured approach. And as you can see, this is what Diana is struggling with this build in particular. So what will be the solution for Diana in terms of itemization to help her thrive in this particular game? I'm glad you asked. Nash's Toothrush, Sunfire, and Demonics. Then you can build full tank if you really, really want, or you can just keep going with Cosmic Drive and other AP itemizations, like Azonia's if you wanted, but those things are what enable you to be more active. Tenacity all of a sudden has more value. That Sunfire burning while you're in the middle of their whole enemy team has insane value. So you're seeing Rengars and Dianas and Kha'Zix's and other champions build Conqueror and more tanky because it allows them to survive and thrive in these longer team fights, have more rotational spells, and those champions who do a lot of damage anyway are still able to thrive in this meta. You are going to see another desperate attempt around the Baron to try and win a fight, but at this point, it doesn't matter. Even though the gold lead is equal, it isn't, because the enemy team is a better team comp. Diana's trying to go in by herself and assassinate people with Yasuo, who's really not playing very well. It is not the Diana's fault that she isn't able to really carry this game. It just shows you the limitations of what she used to be able to get away with and what she cannot get away with now, and that's why I chose this particular video. In terms of the early game jungling, both junglers had pros and cons, and we discussed that, I think, enough so that you should be able to apply it to your own junglers, but if you're struggling to sort of envision how it would look, go ahead to my secondary channel, my gameplay channel. I will be covering every jungler again to see how they can play in this meta and how you can adjust your strategies and itemization to make sure you're having success. So there you have it, a great look at the longer skirmishing, the longer teamfighting, and the implications it can have on different champions and different team comps. Make sure you're playing with your brain, you're playing a bit more reserved, you understand in and out gameplay. And if you want a total jungle carry guide to understand all the markers you need to be hitting, click the link in the box on the top right. But if you want to understand which junglers you should be using to actually get this meta going, click the link in the bottom left.